The Cold War, a battle without bullets. Small Blue Diamond introduction. A war unlike any other. The Cold War wasn't fought with tanks in trenches or invasions on beaches. It was fought with ideas, threats, spies, and nuclear fear. For over 4 decades, the world lived on the edge of annihilation as two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, engaged in a global battle of ideology and influence. This was a war without a single direct military confrontation between the two giants, but its consequences were deeply felt around the world. It shaped the modern world order, divided continents, and left legacies still visible today. Classical Building, Chapter 1. The Origins of the Cold War. The Cold War began in the aftermath of World War II. Although the US and the USSR were allies against Nazi Germany, their alliance was one of convenience, not trust. The US championed capitalism and liberal democracy. The USSR, led by Joseph Stalin, promoted communism and centralized control. After the fall of Nazi Germany, Europe was devastated and divided. The Soviet Union established control over Eastern Europe, installing communist regimes in countries like Poland, Hungary, and East Germany. In response, the U.S. launched the Marshall Plan, providing billions in aid to rebuild Western Europe and keep it capitalist. Winston Churchill famously warned of an Iron Curtain descending across Europe. The Cold War had begun. Glow Showing Europe-Africa Chapter 2. The World Divided. The Cold War was not confined to Europe. The entire world became a battlefield for influence. In Asia, the U.S. supported Japan's post-war recovery, while China fell to communism under Mao Zedong in 1949. In Latin America, the U.S. backed anti-communist regimes to stop Soviet influence. In Africa, newly independent nations were often pulled between both camps. In the Middle East, oil politics and Cold War loyalties intertwined. This ideological struggle was known as a bipolar world. East versus West, communism versus capitalism, the Warsaw Pact versus NATO. Firecracker Chapter 3. Nuclear brinkmanship. One of the defining features of the Cold War was the terrifying arms race, particularly the race to build and stockpile nuclear weapons. In 1949, the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb, ending the U.S. nuclear monopoly. Both sides developed the hydrogen bomb, many times more powerful than the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The result? Mutually assured destruction. The idea that if either side launched nukes, both would be destroyed. Tensions reached a boiling point during the Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962, when U.S. spy planes discovered Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba. For 13 days, the world came closer to nuclear war than ever before, until the USSR backed down in exchange for U.S. missile withdrawals from Turkey. Man Detective Chapter 4. Espionage and Propaganda. With no battlefields, the Cold War was waged through spies, lies, and minds. Agencies like the CIA and the KGB carried out covert operations, assassinations, and coups. Spy networks infiltrated governments and industries. Propaganda became a powerful weapon. Each side portrayed the other as evil, godless, or oppressive. From schoolbooks to radio broadcasts, minds were shaped by fear of communists, capitalists, or nuclear war. Globe with Meridians Chapter 5. Proxy Wars. While the US and USSR never fought directly, they clashed indirectly in proxy wars. Korean War, 1950 to 1953. North Korea, backed by China and the USSR, versus South Korea, backed by the US and UN, ended in a stalemate and a divided Korea. Vietnam War, 1955 to 1975, a brutal conflict where the U.S. failed to stop the spread of communism. Over 58,000 Americans and millions of Vietnamese died. Afghanistan, 1979 to 1989, the USSR invaded to support a communist government. The U.S. armed the Mujahideen, including figures like Osama bin Laden. The Soviets would eventually retreat, a major blow to their power. These wars were devastating and prolonged, the true battlegrounds of the Cold War. Rocket Chapter 6. The Space Race. Another front was the race to conquer space, a symbol of technological and ideological superiority. In 1957, the USSR launched Sputnik, the first satellite. In 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space. The U.S. responded with the Apollo program. In 1969, Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, fulfilling President Kennedy's bold promise. This race fueled innovation in science, math, computers, and missiles. Chart decreasing Chapter 7. The Fall of the Soviet Union. By the 1980s, the Soviet economy was stagnating. The U.S., under Ronald Reagan, escalated military spending, outpacing the USSR. Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev introduced reforms, perestroika, economic restructuring, and glasnost, openness. But these reforms unintentionally unleashed forces of nationalism and dissent across Eastern Europe. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, symbolizing the collapse of communist control in Eastern Europe. By 1991, the Soviet Union dissolved, ending the Cold War. Brain Chapter 8. Lasting Impact of the Cold War. Though the Cold War ended, its impact remains. NATO still exists and is expanding. North Korea remains a divided, militarized Cold War remnant. Nuclear weapons are still stockpiled around the world. The CIA, NSA, and intelligence networks built during the Cold War continue operating. In many ways, tensions between the West and Russia and China echo Cold War rivalries today. The Cold War shaped how we think about freedom, fear, loyalty, and security. Candled conclusion: a war in the shadows. The Cold War wasn't marked by victory parades or surrender treaties. It was a global chess game that left scars across continents. Millions died in proxy wars. Generations lived under the threat of total destruction. And yet it ended not in fire, but in collapse, negotiation, and change. It was truly a battle without bullets, but with consequences that define the 20th century.